I'm here to talk to you today about taking control of testing. So what exactly does that mean? Let's dig in. Masa did my introduction for me, so I'm going to skip that and move straight into a tale of new management. So this is something that happened to me a number of years ago. When I worked on the 3D modeling software, I worked at an office in Mountain View, California, but the headquarters for the company was located in Draper, Utah. The Draper office decided that they wanted a local manager to report on testing progress for the software there in their offices during their various stand-up times. So I jumped in and I was doing my work from remote, and they call me one day and they say, "Craig, we've got a new manager for you." I'm, okay, have a quick call with this person, and their first question to me was, "How many test cases have you written for our 3D modeling software?" And I laughed at that, because to me, the idea of writing test cases for a piece of software where there was an infinite combination of user activities and outcomes and with just me testing and no one else going to test it, I saw no value in doing that. So I laughed it off and I said, "I haven't written any." Another week goes by, another one-on-one, my boss asks me again, "How many test cases have you written?" And I was a little surprised. I thought, "Oh, I didn't know you were serious about this." Okay. Well, no, I haven't written any, and I don't plan to. My boss said, "Well, I need you to write test cases, and I want you to spend half your time writing test cases." And I laughed and I said, "I'm not doing that. That's a terrible idea." A couple days go by, I get a phone call from my boss, my boss's boss, HR, and now I'm in trouble. Now I'm getting a letter of reprimand for insubordination. So I had better write those test cases or I'm going to be fired. So, okay, Monday rolls around and the first half of my day is going to be writing test cases. And within about 2 to 3 hours, maybe, the lead developer in the office with me comes into my office and he says, "Craig, I need you to come test something for me." And I say, "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." And this really caught him off guard. Like, "What do you mean you can't do that?" Like, "Well," and I explained the whole situation. He was not particularly pleased either. There was a lot of cussing in French as he stormed back to his office, made a phone call. And then about an hour later, I was called and told, "Okay, forget this all happened. Go right back to managing yourself. Pretend that we never asked you to do this stuff. I'm going to shred your letter of reprimand. It never happened. Just go back to doing what you do best." So the thing about that is that while I did take control of my testing, in that particular instance, I didn't do it in a very good way, to be honest. But probably the most important takeaway from that particular instance is context. You see, my new manager used to be a technical documentation writer for the NASA Space Shuttle program. And that little bit of context is really important because I can understand why that manager would think writing test cases was extremely important and extremely valuable. So without knowing that, though, I kind of put my foot in it. But nevertheless, taking control of testing is a really important thing that we need to start doing in this industry. But before you can start questioning others and questioning your boss about these things, you have to first be willing to question yourself. You have to be ready to say, "Am I doing what is the most appropriate thing, the most efficient thing to test this product?" In my case, I basically laughed at my boss demanding that I provide written test cases. And because of that, I failed to build a good relationship with my boss. Instead, what I needed to do was actually ask myself, was that the best way to respond to them? Well, no, clearly not. So You have to question yourself. And a quick caveat, I'm not talking about imposter syndrome. You know, we're testers, and a lot of us are going to suffer from imposter syndrome on a regular basis, that feeling of doubting whether or not you're providing value, doubting that you know what you're doing. People wondering if they're going to get found out or caught, that kind of stuff. Like, it's very common for testers. You know, when that happens, just remind yourself that if you know your product well, and if you're constantly trying to learn both testing as a craft and improve that, but also trying to improve your knowledge of the product, then I would argue that you are an expert and therefore cannot be an imposter. But I mean more about questioning yourself as a form of constant personal retrospective, right? You've got to be honest with yourself, but you've also really got to be very critical, okay? Is what you're doing the best way to do it? Is there another way to test this product that would give you good results, give you a stronger feeling of test coverage? Is there a new tool that you could try to use that might help you get more efficient in your testing process, or might give you more clarity and certainty in your testing results? Is there some sort of applicable heuristic you could use that might help you generate new ideas about how to test this thing? And then finally, and maybe even most importantly, is there somebody else you can go talk to and ask them, hey, here's what I did. What would you do to test this? The brain develops bias over time, and we have a hard time seeing what's right in front of us the more we look at the same things over and over. And so questioning yourself can be one way to help try and keep that bias at bay. Part of taking control of testing involves questioning your process, questioning what it is that you do to test your product and how you're testing your product. You know, in my case, from my story there, I instinctively rejected the idea of writing test cases. Now, that might have been because I knew what my context was and I knew what the value of that was compared to actually doing the testing. But I think it was still should have been fair for me to take a pause, look at what it was that I was doing and say, was there some level of documentation that might have been valuable? And I think the answer to that probably would have been yes. I think I could have probably documented things to some degree, but I didn't need to write the kind of test cases that would have been appropriate in my boss's context of testing for the space shuttle. So I also think that I probably should have asked myself, was there any other way I could have accomplished the testing that I was doing? And unfortunately, being a purely visual system with a completely proprietary UI windowing system, there were no tools that could actually automate the testing for me beyond me creating specific scenes and pre-rendering those and comparing them to past results and making sure things look the same. But as a team, you should be questioning your process. You need to know if the goals that you have are appropriate and if they are prioritized in comparison to what the business needs are. And is your testing the best way to accomplish those particular goals? You need to ask, okay, we write a lot of test cases, but really, should we be? And maybe the answer is yes. In certain circumstances, in certain industries where lives are at stake, the answer is obviously absolutely yes. It's imperative that you do it. But there are going to be industries, there are going to be software products where the answer can be no, we don't really need these. And maybe instead we could just write something like a testing prompt. And when I say testing prompt, what I'm referring to in that case is simply writing a list of functionality. Here's a very high level version of the product and the features in the product that I don't want to forget. What's the happy path the customer is going to use? Let me make sure that I've listed those things out so I don't forget to check those and validate that they're still functioning correctly. And maybe there's a few instances where you put a little more detail in because you want to make sure that you're covered. You want to make sure that maybe there's something unique that functionality does that you don't want to forget about. Or maybe there's something there that's broken many times in the past and you don't want to ever let that slip through again. Finally, I think part of taking control of testing is questioning your boss. Now, from my story, I was clearly questioning my boss. I felt that their idea was completely wrong and a waste of time. But instead of just flat out saying to them, no, I'm not going to do this, I should have first understood, why do they want me to do this? Why is it important to them, right? If I had engaged them in a dialogue and a conversation about why they wanted me to do that, I would have understood their point of view. And not only could I have said, okay, my reasoning is correct, but it would have given me the ability to explain to them and help them understand why we didn't need to do that in our context at that time. So you should question if your boss has ever been a tester. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I suspect that many of you who are listening today have been in situations where your manager was not a QA person themselves, was not somebody that has done testing. I have been managed by basically engineers, sometimes engineers that didn't want to have direct reports, product managers, and I'm sure that sometimes we are managed by people that just don't know what we do. They don't understand what the value of a tester is, especially of a manual tester. Okay, manual testing is nebulous. It's an odd duck, as I like to say, and because of that, it's very difficult for people that aren't testers to understand what it is that we do and how it is that we're providing value. So if they don't understand what we do, the risk we face is that a manager will tell us to test in a particular way, not because it's the right thing to do, but because they've heard maybe one of their colleagues at another company, this is how their team tests. Or they've perhaps heard, well, automation solves all your problems, right? You just automate everything and then you're good to go. Well, so your boss may push, do lots of automation, okay? Work on your automation. Everything should be automated. Well, not necessarily. And as a tester, you need to be ready to stand up and say, no, that's not necessarily true. And let me explain why, and let me tell you what we should do instead. So I had a situation where I started working at a company and my boss, after a few months, told me, hey, I need you to start writing automation. And in difference to my previous example, I said, okay, I'll do that, but I don't think now is really the best time, but let me take a crack at it. So I worked on writing automation, and pretty quickly, within a matter of a month, a couple of releases for us, the number of bugs that were escaping into production had been creeping back up from where I had gotten it down to. And when my boss came to me and we talked about it, I said, well, I'm not really surprised. Writing automation, it takes a lot of time. We don't have a great framework yet. And I can either write these test cases or I can do my job and make sure that I test the software. So in that instance, I was able to prove to my boss, hey, I need to take control of this. I need to go back to doing the manual testing for a while. There will be a point in the future where we will have a larger team and it will be more feasible for us to put our time and effort into automation, but right now was not that time. And these days, you're going to have a boss that hears the keyword of AI or machine learning, and you should be really skeptical of that. Is yours a context where machine learning or machine guessing, if you will, actually can be effective for you? you need to validate that that is actually, and this is that whole trust but verify. If your boss says, hey, we should be using machine learning. Okay, well, look into it. See if that's actually a case. See if that's actually true for your context. And if it is, great, like move forward. But if it's not, be ready to put your foot down and say, no, we're not going to do that. And another really important thing to keep in mind about questioning your boss, remember that your boss, and certainly your boss's bosses, they're going to be thinking in metrics, okay? Keeping a company afloat, keeping everything running smoothly, and making sure that you don't have to do layoffs really involves using metrics to verify that the decisions you're making are going to be good decisions for the good of the company and the good of your employees. Metrics help managers and executives make safe decisions about the future of the product. But QA is a bit of an odd duck again, and metrics can be tricky to have good metrics, and it can be very easy to have bad metrics. If you look at a company like Electronic Arts, their testing department uses the metric of how many bugs has an individual tester filed in a week to determine if they're being productive. This is a terrible metric. Explains a lot about why EA games release the way they do. Instead, what you need to be ready to do is think, what is an appropriate and effective metric for us to have that will give our boss an understanding of where things are and how we're progressing. Do not report on vanity or meaningless metrics. You have got to put your foot down and say, no, that does not actually provide value, and that does not help you make smart decisions. But here, let me give you a different metric that I think my team can meet that will provide value and will provide good metrics and understanding for what our progress is and what our performance is. And again, if your boss is dictating to you how to do your testing and they were never a tester, then you should be asking yourself, is this the kind of testing that our users are going to be happy that they are paying us to be performing? And if it's not, you need to be ready to tell your boss, like, I don't think this is the way we should be doing it. And I think we should be doing this other way instead. So I think the takeaway here is own your testing. As a tester, you've got to own what it is that you do, and you've got to verify that you're doing something that actually does provide value, not just because it's the way things have always been done, not because your boss who doesn't know testing says this is the way it should be done. Do what is best for the user and do what is best for your team to actually accomplish the goals of the business in a timely fashion, with good coverage and as much mitigated risks as you can possibly fit into that time frame. And I think that's all I've got for you today.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. We have a few questions over here. So let me just very quickly. So one of them is, what consider two or three, core metrics to apply?
Sure. So probably the biggest one for us that I feel is universally safe is a metric around how many bugs have escaped into production that could have been caught, say, during a regression test, or that automation could have caught. And it does take a little bit of analysis to look at. I mean, you're pulling bug reports that come into the support team, right? Those are often indicators of how well you're doing as testers. Another metric I'll watch is actually what does the trend line look like for the number of support tickets specifically related to problems users are actually having with the product. If that's trending up, then I want to know why is this getting worse, right? QA is the backup to developers to help make sure things go smooth, but support teams are the backup for QA people. If QA misses something, the support team is who picks it up for us, right? So if their work is getting harder or increasing, then we're missing something and we need to look into why that's happening.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit more on how you did the prioritization with respect to business goals?
Yeah, sure. So for us, a big part of it is understanding what it is that the user is trying to accomplish with our product, right? So we have people here, especially in customer success and on the product management team, they're talking to the users daily, and QA goes and sits with those people. Sometimes we can sit in on those calls, but at the very least, we can talk to CS and get a sense for what is it that the user is trying to accomplish with this feature. What is the biggest problem that they need? And then we know what scenarios to test first and what to make sure works the most. Sometimes there are odd edge case uses for some of our feature sets, and we want to make sure that works too, but we need to make sure that the broad majority of users' use cases will be covered. And you can't guess at that. You've got to base that prioritization off the data you get from actual user interviews.
Cool. So we had just a couple of minutes. So very quickly, a comment from my side. It is very clear that it is extremely important for quality and for testing to focus not only on the tests that need to be made and the kind of tests that need to be made, but most importantly, why it is that we're doing what we're doing.
Yes.
And take an ecosystem perspective in terms of not just the technicality of what is being built or the features, but actually beyond that, the business side, the motivation behind it, the customer and the end user. So the last question I have here has to do with that in terms of the question is there any reading that you recommend to acquire or to develop the kind of soft skill you promoted here?
I don't have any that I require. I love the book called It's Your Ship. It's a great book on management and leadership. And it's by a naval officer who took command of a ship that was basically the worst rated ship in the Navy, and he turned it around into one of, if not the best rated ship in the Navy. It's an interesting read, certainly maybe more so for me because of my background, but I think all of his points there really, kind of still hit home for those of us here in the business world. And also to your point, as testers, question everything also means, are we building the right thing for the user, right? You've got to think holistically about the product as a whole, because that's a part of your job. It's a part of what you do. And you're probably the only one that can do this. PMs and developers, they're mostly on specific teams in specific areas of the product. And even if you're a tester on a specific part of a product, you should still maintain as much as possible a holistic view of the product as a whole, so that you can think about the impact that a change in one part of the system could potentially have in any part of the system, so that you can help mitigate risks of bugs happening as a result of I'll say cross-contamination, but also sometimes a feature works in a particular way and it's intuitive there, but you go somewhere else and they built it in a different way in a different part of the product, and that lack of consistency doesn't make your product look good.
Absolutely. So I'm not sure, did you mention the author and the title?
Oh, the book is called It's Your Ship.